This really is a great time to be a horror fan. Even though Western horror has lost its way somewhat, the sheer amount of truly brilliant horror media available from other countries has never been more accessible or, well, better, particularly in terms of manga. Whether you're a fan of gory, gruesome, squicky things happening to the human body, or spoopatastic nightmare fuel, manga really does cater to every taste imaginable. But where do you even start with this much choice? Well, hopefully that's where I come in. Today, I'm going to take a look at what I consider to be the best of the best in terms of horror manga, and who knows, maybe even you seasoned horror manga fanatics will find something worth reading here. As always, a few caveats apply. I'm not going to include short stories, but collections are acceptable if the entire collection is, at a whole, excellent. Sorry in advance to Junji Ito fans. To be considered, they also have to be both scary and legitimately excellent, and for this one, no holds are barred. So you can expect to see some old favorites potentially cropping up from other videos. Keep in mind, this isn't an exhaustive list. If there's something you think should be on this list that didn't make it, let me know in the comments. Without any further ado, let's take a look at the absolute best horror manga for your reading pleasure in 2022. At number 5. Another. Fans of Japanese horror media probably know this one better from its admittedly great anime adaptation. But of the two, I'd reckon the manga to be a bit stronger. The setup for this yarn is classic campfire story material. Class 3-3 at a Japanese middle school is rocked by tragedy after a well-liked student passes away. To help them cope, and as something of a tribute, the class and teacher continue to pretend the student is still alive. And because they can't recognize the obvious setup for a ghost story, spoopy things begin happening, and gradually a tidal wave of death and horror sweeps out over the class and their loved ones as they start to suffer horrible Heath Robinson-esque deaths not dissimilar to those in the Final Destination series. Main character Koichi Sakakibara and the rest of 3-3 must get to the bottom of what's happening, which may be tied into the presence of a strange, mysterious student Misaki and a powerful curse going back decades. It's not especially long, even counting its explanatory prequel Another Zero, but it's absolutely worth a read even if you've seen the anime, as it's quite different to your standard horror manga. It really has everything I like in my creepy stories: ghosts, school, mystery, and horrible, horrible death. If it sounds up your alley, it probably is. At number 4. H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. As you may have guessed, I am a huge fan of H.P. Lovecraft, although honestly I tend to prefer the various adaptations and expanded universe stuff that came after, particularly the works of Brian Lumley and Graham Masterton. But holy crap, was this manga a little gem to find. Authored by Go Tanabe, this is an incredibly faithful retelling of the classic and some would say definitive Lovecraft tale, involving an Arctic expedition that stumbled across an ancient alien city. As our characters set about exploring the antediluvian ruins, they gradually piece together the history of the place and discover that, well, it may not be as uninhabited as they initially thought. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and all that. It's well written, absolutely gorgeous to look at, and captures the eerie, otherworldly feel of Lovecraftian horror perfectly. Apparently, Gore has also adapted numerous other Lovecraft stories, and I'll have to give those a look in due course. Still though, definitely worth tracking down for all you fans of Lovecraft. At number 3. Aftermath Radio. If you've seen basically anything on this channel before, you've probably realized that I have a gigantic love boner for the works of Masaki Nakayama, and out of his 3 primary series, Aftermath Radio, also known as PTSD Radio in some quarters, is probably the best. Defying easy categorization, Radio is, on the surface, a collection of very short horror stories and sometimes just horror vignettes, featuring what may be the creepiest art and designs I've encountered, well, in anything ever. It's one of the few examples of things that have actually made me jumpy for an extended period after reading. While initially, all of the stories seem to be unconnected and occasionally abstractly bridged, as you continue to read, you'll realize that the stories tie together to tell a bigger story about the sinister and mysterious god of hair, and an ancient curse that seems to be following those from a specific town in rural Japan, as something strange and awful spreads out into the wider nation. And the scares in this one, oh man, this is one that'll stay with you long, long after. And when you go to brush your teeth tonight, if you feel like there might be something in the room with you, it probably isn't the best idea to look in the mirror. This would feature likely even higher on this list if it wasn't for one thing. The series has apparently been abandoned by Nakayama in favor of a new Fuan no Tane series. This isn't confirmed and it's hard to find definitive information, but if you're looking for something with a satisfactory conclusion, this might annoy you. All that aside though, it's a hell of a manga and should leave you more than a little paranoid about the shadowy things lurking just outside of sight. At number 2, The Drifting Classroom. In terms of fantastic horror manga you've probably never read, this is going to be a tough one to beat. Kazuo Umezu might be the greatest horror mangaka of all time, and this is his seminal work, featuring an elementary school that is suddenly transported to the middle of a vast alien desert, and both students and teachers must find a way to survive not just the desert and the monsters it contains, but each other. This is a mixture between Lost, Stephen King's The Mist, and honestly The Stand, and Lord of the Flies. And this being an Umezu story, you get plenty of grotesque visuals, gory death, and bad things happening to, well, kids. Yeah, if this sort of thing bothers you, then this, along with his other works, might not be for you. That said, there's a reason it tends to crop up on best of all time lists. It's clever, it's well structured, it's genuinely scary at times, and it'll have you on the absolute edge of your seat until the final page. The art is pretty damn good for the era, being a much older title, and if you can get beyond the style and, frankly, some of the content, you'll find a dark hidden gem waiting for you. Finally, at number 1, When the Cicadas Cry. Yeah, what else could it be? Also known as Higurashi no Nakukoro ni, or Higurashi When They Cry, how would I even start to explain the warped genius of this little visual novel turned manga turned anime? Well, okay, there's a genre of manga and anime that I've been struggling to think of a good name for, and have been referring to as cute traps. My wife has made me promise to never ever call it that again. Basically, it's horror in disguise, luring you in with what seems to be a harmless, wholesome slice of life or adventure story before revealing that it's actually pitch black screaming horror. While I was debating making the number 1 spot a tie between Higurashi and its pseudo-sequel Umineko, in terms of pure horror, Higurashi is really hard to beat. Grade schooler Keiichi returns home to the quiet mountain town of Hinamizawa and befriends a number of local girls in what initially seems to be a light-hearted riff on the harem genre, but gradually you realize that something might not be quite right with the town and its inhabitants. And more than this, well, that would be giving the game away. Let's just say that this is one you need to experience for yourself, as it's one of the most memorable, original, and outright disturbing things that you'll probably ever read. And in terms of horror, it contains what I consider to be the single scariest moment in horror manga and anime pretty much ever. Naturally, if you haven't seen or read Higurashi before, it's very dark, very disturbing, and the manga in particular can get rather squicky at times, so buyer beware, I guess. There's a reason that this is often considered to be a rite of passage for fans of the darker side of Japanese media, and has become so popular in its own right that it recently received an entirely new series, retelling and recontextualizing the original. If you haven't read Higurashi before, stop this video right now, head over to the dealer or legitimate site of your choice, buy it, and read it immediately. I can promise you that you won't regret it, or if you do, it won't be because it's bad. So that's the 5. But before we finish up here, there are 1 or even 2 titles that are conspicuously missing from this list, and there's a reason for that. For my next video, I'll be doing another complete story thus far deep dive into a currently very popular manga that I consider to be on par with Higurashi. So what is it? Well, for that, you'll have to wait and see. Hell, maybe even consider subscribing. It's going to be a banger, so I'm going to say cheers for the day and get to work. Take care, stay safe, and remember, if you think that you hear something behind you, maybe don't turn around to look. And with that, this is the Owl, signing off.